Does AI know what you're going to do even before you do it? If human behavior is so predictable that even before we make a conscious decision to do something, AI may already know what that is. And that is shocking to me. It also has profound implications for the development of artificial intelligence, particularly if it's combined with predictive analytics. This stuff can get a bit complex at times, but on the Asia Tech podcast, we want to break down complex topics into easy to understand nuggets, so we are not surprised when things change. I was fortunate to talk about all of this with Dr. Zohar Bronfman, the co-founder and CEO of Pecan AI. Zohar has a dual PhD in computational neuroscience and philosophy. He has spent a ton of time understanding how the human brain works, and this is foundational to his work with artificial intelligence. We discussed how human behavior is predictable, generative AI, predictive AI, and what the future of artificial intelligence will look like. Let's welcome Zohar to the show. Before we jump in, let's thank the sponsor of this episode, Dr. Tech. Dr. Tech can help you build your e-commerce store and start selling quickly online and on social media in just a few days. And Dr. Tech stores are gorgeous, modern, and responsive. They are fully customizable and simple to use. Dr. Tech stores have hundreds of included optimizations that will help you sell more online, and a support team that can answer all of your questions. With Dr. Tech, there are no hidden costs, no commissions on sales, no add-ons to buy. Everything is included in one simple subscription. So go to hellodr.tech/ATP to get a free trial and start building your store. You can find the link in the description below. Also, Dr. Tech is offering a special deal to the listeners of the Asia Tech podcast. After your free trial, you can get your first full month for only $1. To get this deal, simply type ATP into the live chat and they will send you a special promo code. Thanks again to Dr. Tech for sponsoring, and now let's get back to the show. Can I ask you this, if you don't mind? Like, what got you interested in the neuroscience, the philosophy of science, and just like all these cognitive studies? Was it something that like your family discussed when you were a kid, that like your grandmother did? Like, where does this come from?
Oh my God! In all honesty, I consider myself quite knowledgeable when it comes to popular science of physics and math and biology. Nothing is even remotely as interesting to me when it comes to neuroscience and the mind. And this is the thing: it's the mind on the one hand, and neuroscience on the other. Obviously, they are very much interconnected. And in all reality, what happened is that I started my master's in philosophy out of pure intellectual curiosity. I wanted to understand how very smart people thought about knowledge, about the world, about what's out there. And while doing my philosophy, I realized that I'm looking only at a part of a puzzle. I realized that a big other chunk, an adjacent or a related point of view, is the scientific point of view. And that's where I decided I'm going to understand the cognitive and the neuroscience things in parallel. And it gave me a very holistic view of the same topic, just from different angles.
Yeah, it's really interesting. And again, I don't want to deep dive into this so much, if you don't mind, but I find this really interesting. To understand philosophy at some level, right? To really understand it, like it's super interesting, no matter how you look at it, no matter what angle you look at it from. But then when you start studying the neuroscience of it, like why do we have these philosophies? Where do they emanate? Why are they there? It must give you a completely different view on just like how the mind is working and what its output is, if that makes any sense.
Absolutely. Again, depending on how deep we want to go in that direction.
Go for a second. Yeah, go for it.
I'll just say that we live in an era when there's so much knowledge out there that it's not a question of whether you can get to that knowledge like it's used to be the case. It's a question of which knowledge you decide you want to consume, right? It's how you build your knowledge for yourself. And my personal approach was that because of the structure of knowledge today, which is extremely vertical, very narrow and very deep, right? You can spend 30 years understanding a sub-discipline. there are huge advantages because people become quite experts in a specific field, and they know like 100 times more than their peers 50 years ago.
Yeah.
There's also a disadvantage of you're losing the bigger picture.
Yeah.
And that's why I wanted to kind of supplement those two rabbit holes combined.
It's so interesting. I want to do a little more of this, if you don't mind. When I was in college, I studied Japanese, and the teacher, the professor who was teaching us language, first of all, they only spoke to us in Japanese in the class, so there was no translation, right? And actually, I learned this in yeshiva, which will probably not surprise you. The principle, because we were studying the Bible in Hebrew, I don't know why I'm talking about this, but we were. And the teacher would say, don't translate into English because there's no direct one-to-one translation. And I learned that when I was like 9 or 10 years old. And I kind of used that for the rest of my life. But the point is, when I was studying Japanese, the professor was also getting a PhD in like the derivation of words, etymology, right? And he would come into class like on Monday morning, and his hair would be a mess. Like it looked like he hadn't been sleeping for a while, because when you consider like where a word comes from in any language, right, and particularly in multiple languages, at some point it's got to blow your mind in a way, right? Like, why do we understand what any of these things mean that we're saying? And I'm curious if you had a similar experience when you were doing this cognitive neuroscience study, particularly in conjunction with the philosophy. Were there times where you were just like, wow? Do you know what I mean?
Yes.
Where you learned something, where you figured something out, you were just like, that's insane.
Yes, absolutely. You almost bring me the goosebumps when you talk about that, because I think in general, whenever you, like I mentioned earlier, go very, very down the rabbit hole at a specific discipline of knowledge, you'll find that you are at some point staring in the eyes of God. And it relates to etymology, it relates to religion, it relates to every scientific and non-scientific discipline that we have today. And I can definitely recall one or two areas for me. I'll give you just one example, which I think is mind-blowing. I don't know how many people actually think about it in their day-to-day, but science has proven historically, beyond any reasonable doubt, that human behavior is predictable to a very large degree, in the sense that individuals come to the awareness of a decision they made after specific events in the brain already took place, and they were not aware of them. So in other words, the science community can today, in theory, build a device that can tell you, Michael, in 200 milliseconds, you're going to grab the water, but you're not even aware that you're going to do it. And it goes for bigger and bigger decisions as well. So realizing that so much is going on in our brain and eventually affects our decisions, and that these things can be deciphered and predicted on, has been a moment of awe and complete humbleness when I first encountered it.
Yeah. The rest of today is going to be amazing, because I'm not going to be able to stop thinking about it. But this is a really good segue into the other stuff that I want to talk about. I want to talk about predictive AI, right? Because this is something that you guys have been working really hard on. And again, I like to presume I understand some of it, but if I don't, I want to break it down into components, right? So maybe you can separate this out for me into generative AI, something that most people feel like they have an understanding of, and predictive analysis, and then explain for like a layperson how the power of combining these two things together actually work in a business context. Is that fair?
Yeah, absolutely. So obviously, two big topics. Both have a very long and deep legacy. So it's important to say generative AI is not something new. We've been doing the scientific community and the AI community. We've been doing generative AI for quite some time now, more than a decade for sure. And generative AI has a very self-explanatory name from that perspective. It uses artificial intelligence models, specifically neural networks, which is one subclass of AI models, it uses specific types of neural networks to create something that wasn't part of their initial input. So if you think about it, neural networks take input. For example, think of it as hundreds of thousands of images of cats and dogs. At the first incarnation of neural networks were very good in separating patterns, okay, recognizing and separating patterns between cats and dogs. As an example, they would be very good in saying, this is a dog because of this specific set of features, and this is a cat, right? We do it also with our brain. We look at a picture of a cat or a dog, and instantly we are able to say whether it belongs to one class or another. Generative models took it one step further, and they were able to say, not only that I now understand, quote unquote, what is the class of dogs and the class of cats, I can now take some kind of input and I can create a new kind of a cat that has very similar features to the class of cats, but is not part of the samples that I consumed as a machine learning model. That's the generative AI. It's the ability of a model to generate another sample, basically, of what it's learned from. Predictive modeling, which is many times also called machine learning, is a cousin, right? Both are AI technologies, but it does something very, very different. Again, different and similar depending on your philosophical view. Machine learning predictive models consume data that had some kind of historical pattern, a historical pattern, and they presume to say something about a future event in the sense of what is the likelihood that this specific event is going to happen in the future again. The big difference between the two is the type of inputs that they are dealing with. While neural networks and generative models are very much focused on what is sometimes called unstructured data. It can be images, it can be audio, it can be text. These are the areas that the neural networks focus on. The classic machine learning prediction models focus on numerical data, transactional data, tabular data, structured data. These types of data are very much abundant in the business realm. Think of any business you can imagine. That business gathers data like when did the user log into the website, what was their action, when did it took place, when did they make a purchase, when and how big was the purchase, the amount, all of those questions. These are numerical questions, and they have their own very unique structure based on the business. The interesting thing, and I'm coming to an end in fusing those two, the interesting thing is that predictive modeling, machine learning predictive modeling, has a very, very long historical business application. Think about it. If you're predicting the future from an event, from a business event perspective, you are making a dramatic change to your business. The first areas when it started was during the 50s and the 60s, when financial algorithm companies like Renaissance, if you're familiar, started using these models to predict how derivatives and stocks are going to perform. That's how long back these AI methods go. The generative aspects are still looking for their business application, because the generative AI capabilities are very good in interacting with the world and with generating specific texts, videos, audio, and so forth, as we see from OpenAI and others. The interesting thing is that they were never merged. It was never a case where you used those large language models, those generative AI models, in the business context to provide predictions. That has been something that technology hasn't allowed yet. and that is now becoming something that can be transformative for organizations. So you can think of a generative interface, like a chat-like experience, like you're talking to the machine, but being able to ask questions about the future business outcome, which is a completely ML, machine learning based AI.
So can I ask you this? Because one of the things you said earlier when we were talking about cognitive neuroscience, you said it's a given in the scientific community that given the right information, a scientist can predict when I'm going to drink a bottle of water. Right. And in your mind, while it's amazing, the fact that we know this now makes it kind of unremarkable. Right. But then how does that translate into business and in this combination of predictive analytics and generative AI? And then think we can talk about Renaissance, right? Because I come out of a program trading background. We ran, and one of the questions I had was like, algorithmic trading is, the history of this is long. We've been doing this for 20 years and now almost 30 years on portfolio trading desks and on equity trading desks, right? Is this combination of predictive AI and generative AI going to make that trading so much more sophisticated and so much better? It's just one use case of it because of the combination of those two things. All we were doing in the past was saying, here's a whole bunch of data that's verified and clean. Given certain circumstances, which we can then map onto this data that we have from the past, right? Back testing. How do we then predict what's going to happen right now or in a moment from now based on all the information that we know is happening at the moment as well? And this is what Renaissance did at scale, right? And really, really quickly with huge throughput, and then make trading decisions. And then the other question is, how does it apply, right? Because you talked about this, like what's the business application for a company like an e-commerce company that's just doing sales, right? And that wants to sell dog clothing or cat clothing. Where do all these things come together?
Yes. So I'll start with your permission with the second question.
Go ahead.
I think that if you're, let's imagine you're an e-com company, right? You're not Amazon, because they are obviously huge and they have their own predictive and machine learning capabilities. By the way, it's a huge part of what made them Amazon, right? If you think about in general, if you think about what made the large, huge, successful companies, large, huge, and successful, it usually boils down to sophisticated machine learning in the right place in the right time. So if you're an e-commerce company and you have your decent volume of activity and you have your business processes, right? You have your promotions, you have your email marketing campaigns, you have your next best offer recommendation, your retention efforts. Eventually there are classic pillars of customer acquisition and engagement and retention efforts that you are engaged with. Those usually in a standard e-com company, those usually are not informed by any type of a prediction. You're basically using your basic data analysis and your gut feeling and saying, we should give a promotion of whatever, 10% to every customer who hasn't made a purchase in the last 2 weeks.
Right.
That's a great business logic. It's a great business rule. But it's like saying, Michael is going to drink in this episode, is going to drink water in the next 15 minutes whenever he reaches his arm. It's a fair prediction. Right. We, as humans, we make predictions all the time. But imagine I knew far in advance that you're going to drink at a specific point in time, or that I know that a specific customer is going to churn, or what's their lifetime value, or what is the promotion I should give them. If I knew it by making predictions, the KPIs, the business optimization, would have looked completely different. And that's what...
Yeah, for sure. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I'm just saying that's what Gen AI fused with machine learning provides those classic e-com and other companies. It provides them with the ability to operate an interface that is Gen AI-like. So it's like talking to a virtual agent, but that virtual agent is not just creating text or code. That virtual agent is actually your virtual predictive agent. It tells you what's going to happen and helps you run the business and optimize your main processes.
So can I ask you this? One of the things that you wrote, and I did a little bit of reading on some of the stuff that you've written, so forgive me if this sounds like I'm just reading back to you something that you know for sure. And I'm going to quote it, right? Even when maximizing decision accuracy requires weighting all the evidence equally, decision makers will often give stronger weight to evidence occurring early or late in the evidence stream, right? Can you tell me just from the research that you've done why that's the case? And then maybe talk about business examples where that was the case and how AI kind of solves that problem. I think it's a persistence thing, but I'm curious how you view this.
Yeah, it's such an amazing anecdote because it's a window into the amount of biases that we as humans have ingrained in us, right? So
Yeah.
it's not that we make a conscious decision to underweight all the information we have during the regular process of our deliberation. It's just
Right.
our brain is built with a way that whenever you have something at the beginning, like if you consider like a stream of information that you are considering as a decision maker in your business, you would pay a ton of attention to the beginning, right? There's a very strong primacy effect. You will remember very well what happened at the beginning, and there's a very strong recency effect. So think of it a little bit as a U-shaped weighting function. You weight the primary and the recent of the evidence the most. Now, there are good reasons if you think about the nature, if you think about evolution, if you think about different considerations, there are good reasons to do it. It's very hard to be completely unbiased and take everything into consideration the same way. But obviously, in the business realm, you can't afford underweighting all the good stuff that comes in between. You want to understand what's happening in your business throughout the journey of your deliberation. If you are going to consider the data, you want to consider it in a completely unbiased manner. Now, it's extremely hard, and this is one thing that I really wanted to underline. It's extremely hard for the human mind to make a pattern recognition on numerical data, on business data. Unlike images and texts, and again, there are evolutionary reasons for that. When you see an image, you understand the image immediately. When you hear something, you understand what you hear immediately. Our senses, our cognition, and the entire sensory apparatus are all tuned for text, for images, for audio. We don't handle business data, number data. We don't handle it well. And that's where the machine learning actually comes in play. It compensates for our innate inability to analyze numerical data. And by relying on machine learning, you can correct some of the things you just don't see, you're blind to.
Yeah.
And that will surface. It will never make a decision for you. You know what's best for your business, like any other business owner. But it will just surface considerations that were not there before.
Is there a specific thing that you studied when you were doing all your research and getting your PhD that underlined this idea that stuff that happens in the middle, like, is there a physical or cognitive or neuroscientific reason why, and you said maybe an evolutionary reason, why humans ignore that stuff? Like, what is the build inside of us that says we can recognize, like, I look at a dog, I know it's a dog, I don't have to think about it, kind of thing, right? And when I hear music, I know, like, that's Billy Joel. I'm not thinking, I'm not analyzing it, I just know it. But if I look at a bunch of numbers, it's just a bunch of lines and circles. Do you know what I mean?
Yes.
Except for very few people. So what is it in the evolutionary process or in the neuroscientific process that makes that the case? Like, why weren't we built that way?
Yeah. So obviously, you put two scientists in a room, there are four opinions. So it's still debated. But
fair enough.
I will tell you my personal interpretation and how I think today the scientific community thinks about it. I think it's actually not that you are underestimating the quote unquote middle. I think that we have an overestimation of the initial and the last pieces of evidence. And why is that? I think that for different reasons. The initial pieces of evidence, they have something with it's called abruptness, right? The first time you see something, it leaves a greater mark. That's why many times people say you don't get a chance to leave a
To
second
make a
impression.
Yeah, you only get one time to make a first impression, right?
Exactly.
Like it's that's exactly what I was thinking. Sorry, go
So
ahead.
that's why people overweight the beginning of a narrative about evidence. Now, the recent elements have a different consideration. And that's, I think, effect that comes from when you run a business and you have to reach a point when you need to make a decision. You would probably assume, it might not be the case, but you will probably
Yeah,
assume, and it makes sense to assume it in some way, that the things that happened most recently are the things that are most likely to persist. Because you don't really know how things change or whether they change. Because again, you don't know how to analyze numbers well enough because we are
right.
humans, we're not machines.
Yep. Yep.
So you basically tell to yourself, if I seen something happening yesterday, I will assume it will continue pretty much the same today. Whereas
Yeah.
maybe there's seasonality or some kind of a cycle happening, and something that happened 3 weeks ago is actually far more important. You won't be able to say. You need a
Right.
machine.
This is true for almost all walks of life. Can I make like a completely unrelated analogy?
Sure.
When Patrick Mahomes was playing college football, people looked at him and he was like, throws the ball too much, throws too many interceptions, never going to win anything. Because that's all they saw. And there were exogenous impacts, like all these other things happening. And now he's like the greatest quarterback of all time. And I'm not saying he is or isn't, but I'm just saying like that's how the opinion changes. And you're right. It's because of the abruptness, the recency of the data that they have that's changed. I want to ask you this too, though, right? Because if humans don't know what they don't know and they're not sure, right, this is a sales problem for you or a sales issue. So when you go in to sell Pecan and you say, okay, we're going to pay attention to all this stuff, like how would you characterize the teams to which you're pitching the products that you're building, in the sense that you may understand, as we've been talking about, like the nitty-gritty details of all this stuff way better than they do? There must be a learning curve for the institutions that you're selling to, but also what drives those aha moments that you're talking about, that abruptness where they go, oh, I get it, we've been ignoring that stuff, and now that we know that and we can see the predictive benefits of having this, then it changes our business. What are those moments, if you can run through some of them from you, or at least one of them? Yeah.
So very early in our journey, we had a aha moment of our own.
Okay.
We realized that there's an audience or a subset of individuals within companies that are perfectly built towards starting to use machine learning the way we think companies should start using machine learning. And I'm referring to a role which is usually called analytics or business analytics or data analytics or BI. And I want to explain the role a bit, and I want to explain why they are such an amazing audience for using machine learning. So the business intelligence, business analytics, data analytics individuals are individuals who are working with the business shoulder to shoulder and supporting them in those business processes I mentioned by running human analytics on the data. So they can ask, for example, how many customers visited the website last week, of which how many converted to our new offering.
Right.
That's a human analytics. It's a human individual asking the data a human intelligence question. It's amazing. Right. It was actually a revolution in our business realm 15, 20 years ago, not like a century ago.
Right.
Those individuals know everything you need to know to do machine learning. They know the business, they know the data, and they understand the business processes that rely on the human analytics. They know that as humans, you can't do a sophisticated analysis that relies on more than 2 or 3 data points. It's just beyond our cognitive capabilities. We can analyze 2 or 3 points. After that, we are lost in the woods. So those individuals are quote unquote dying to put their hands on something that can augment their human analytic intelligence with AI analysis. So
Right.
they can then take the data and ask a question that doesn't inject their own intuition into it, but rather lets the machine provide the predictions that they believe the business requires. Now, the other nice thing about this community is that although it's not as experienced and skilled in specifically machine learning and AI like the data scientists, which are the other group of data individuals in other areas of the business, they are completely relevant for the world of AI. They only need to have the tools and the capability built into their organization. So that's the personal revolution we are taking.
Yeah. So when you walk into these companies and you find these people, like you said, that are tangential to the business, right? They're not doing sales, but they're providing the analytics to the sales teams. And you find them and you say, how about this? If you use this, that's their aha moment. They're like, uh-oh, this could like really change the way we do this other thing that I'm closely related to, but I'm not doing myself. Yeah? Does that make sense?
100%.
But what are the risks, right, of getting to those people, giving them the tools, and like, what if they fall short? Do you know what I mean?
Yes.
And then what is the response? Because this is the problem, right? Because there's all this magic around artificial intelligence. And maybe those guys and gals that are doing these biz dev roles or doing the data analytics roles or business analytics roles, right? They're thinking, if I had these tools, I could be way better at this. And then there's this human inclination to kind of go, wait until you see this new report that I have kind of thing. You know what I'm saying though, right? And if it doesn't generate, this gets all the way back to the beginning conversation we're having, right? If it doesn't generate like new business or live up to these new KPIs, what are the risks there? And then people just going like, we're not going to do that kind of thing. Do you know what I mean?
Yes.
And how do you disintermediate that or risk mitigate that?
Yes. The flip side on having this great power of AI predictions under your fingertips is that you lose a bit of control because the clarity of why exactly the predictive model made the prediction it made is murkier than our own intelligence. So again, this comes back to our cognitive structure as humans. When we say give 10% promotion to every user who didn't visit the website for 2 weeks, we understand exactly why that user was given a promotion.
Yeah, and there's an expected result too. You didn't do this for 2 months or whatever. Here's a 10% discount on something you've bought before. You're probably going to buy it again. Kind of things. It's very clear. Yeah, sorry.
It's clear. It's reportable. It's understandable, and it's very hard to tell that data analyst who made that rule, what in God's name have you been thinking when you've done it, right? Because
that's
it's reasonable.
Ridiculous. It's not going to happen. Yeah.
Whenever we say, okay, give a promotion only to people that the Pekin predictive model said you should give a promotion to, there's an act of almost like losing control. Almost like a fear of the unknown. And that's a real thing. Organizations don't adopt AI in many cases because they don't have enough understanding of what happens under the hood. And for that purpose, we've invested as a company and as a community a lot of calories into providing an overview and a view in general into what made the machine make its decision. But there's one additional thing that we have to take into consideration, and it is that, again, these are like psychological biases, right? Because when you do marketing, right, and when you pay Google and Facebook and LinkedIn a ton of money, and they bring you back specific leads, you don't really know what happened under their hood. You just trust them blindly.
Right.
What you've done as a marketer, if you're practicing good marketing exercises, you've conducted A/B tests because you became results driven rather than process driven.
Yeah, I was going to say.
You think about the results and you say, if LinkedIn brought me these leads and I invested that amount of money, fine, because they use their own AI. Now, the same thing applies here. We always recommend our partners and customers, and we work with them on implementing it. If you're going to use an AI, a Gen AI, an ML, or any blend of these models into augmenting some of your business processes, you have to embrace the fact that you won't have full clarity because you're no longer in the realm of human intelligence.
Right.
You're in the realm of artificial intelligence. Embrace it. 2, always be testing. Always be testing. You can always divide, you can always measure, and you can always see with your eyeball the big difference between relying on human intelligence and relying on AI.
Yeah, so this brings up another topic that I want to discuss with you, and that's something also that you've written about and done research on, and that's transparency, right? And this gets into this kind of murky little world of, I trust what's happening, but I want a little bit more information on what's going on in the back end. And we used to do this on the trading desk too, right? Like we had VWAP algorithms, we had best price, we had all these different algos. And at some point, the buy-side traders would ask us, what is the algo doing? Right? Like, why did it do that? Because it didn't seem to make a lot of sense. And to be fair, I don't know if you know what a VWAP algorithm is. It's one of the most simplest algorithms, right? Value-weighted average price, I think, or volume-weighted average price, yeah? So I haven't done it in a while, but it's volume-weighted, right? So if a ton of volume trades, the VWAP algorithm is going to try to catch up. It's not going to make a decision, at least in simplistic terms. It's just going to say, like, I just saw a ton of volume trade. I don't want to be behind volume, right? But over time, as you develop these algorithms, you can think maybe that's an anomaly. Maybe it's all going to come back. Maybe that pushed the price up too high. It's going to come back down. If I wait, I get better prices, right? Which a human trader can make that decision, but can an algo do it? But at least we understood what was happening. Do you want to talk at all about this transparency?
Yes, I do. And, it's so funny that eventually these issues come back to my academic philosophical background because eventually when you boil it down, it comes to the fact that people are also, a cognitive animal. We have our own way of thinking about things and analyzing things. And it actually is a gap between how we think about things and how machines think about things.
Yeah.
And the thing is, there is a ton of things that can be done from a transparency point of view, and I'll get to it in a minute. But there is a fundamental thing that we have to put on the table and be honest about. We will never be able to understand the machine learning and AI algorithms the way we understand our own decisions. The reason is these are two different levels of explanation. When you want to explain something for a human, you use something that we call in philosophy intention. You try to explain their intention, their goal-driven behavior, the consideration, logic, and unaware considerations they take. He reached out to the bottle because he was thirsty. But when a machine tries to explain its own decisions, it would be something like, this group of neurons fired at this rate, that group of neurons fired at that rate, therefore the arm is going to be reached to the bottle of water. It's a mechanistic explanation versus an intentional explanation. And the same logic applies one-to-one with the business understanding. If you want to give a promotion to someone that hasn't visited the website for 2 weeks, it's an intention. You have an intention to help those who forgot to log in. Right. If you want to give a promotion to someone because the machine learning algorithm wants to give it to them, then it means that something from the geo that he logged in or she logged in from, something they made a week ago in the website, some other elements that resemble, and all of those are being multiplied by murky numbers that no one can really explain. All of that combined provides you with a mechanistic explanation of the likelihood to convert given a promotion. So when you think about transparency, as an individual who is considering adoption of AI, you have to put your intentional stance aside. You
Yeah,
have to
because
flip the switch and be completely comfortable with using a mechanistic explanation, which is what the machine learning model is going to provide you with.
yeah, because at some level, even if you listen to the explanation, even if it's completely transparent, you may not understand it. And I think in some cases, most people would never understand it, right? Because it's mechanistic as opposed to intentional, which is the way you live your life normally. But like if I said to you, why did you do that? You could say, I'm thirsty. I don't need any more explanation. I completely understand it. But if I asked the machine why you did it and it gave all these other numerical explanations, I'd just be like, fine, let's just do some more sales, because it doesn't make any sense to a human who's not thinking that way. And frankly, never will think that way. Is that fair?
Completely fair.
Okay. I want to ask you this too. I was having a conversation, and this is more just like an opinion of yours. I was having a conversation with somebody this morning about artificial intelligence as well. We were trying to make an equivalency to something more on the persistent side, like the fact that it's just going to be everywhere, right? As opposed to being a functionality in and of itself. It's just going to be part of everything that we do. And the thing that he came up with was electricity. And I was thinking about this after we hung up the call. It's like, I have no idea how those lights work. And if I've been thinking about this for a long time, like 20 or 30 years. If everything that we have in the universe just somehow went away, whether it's this table or this microphone or this computer screen just went away and I had to like rebuild it, not possible. Because I don't know how any of this stuff works, right? There's a camera over there. I have no idea how it autofocuses. I can guess, but I could never reproduce it. But even something as simple, which is a relative term like electricity, I flip a switch over there, the light goes on. I don't know how any of that works either. And I don't think most people do. Are we going to get to the point where the AI stuff that we use is so persistent that it's going to be everywhere as well? And in a lot of cases, most people are not going to have any idea, one, that it's there, or two, how it works. Yeah?
This is a very nice way of thinking about it, which definitely resonates. I would like immediately agree. I think as humans, it takes us time as a complete civilization. It takes us time to adopt and adapt to groundbreaking technologies. Every new technology, and maybe it should, is being greeted with healthy cynicism, with healthy concern, and it's fine. It's completely fine. But eventually, life-transforming, groundbreaking technologies are always being adopted, and we adapt as a species. It's actually one of our core evolutionary strengths, specialization. Basically, what you're describing is specialization, right? I have no idea how to make a screen, and my colleague who makes screens has no idea how to make a podcast or knowledge or whatever your profession is. The fact that we as humans were able to specialize and have each and every individual become those deep verticalization of knowledge, like I mentioned earlier, is only going to increase more and more. And those who master AI and can help us as a civilization to enjoy from it are obviously going to be extremely important to us as civilization, as others. It will take a little bit of time. It won't take a ton of time because the benefit of adopting is so high. It will take a little bit of time until regulation is better, until the common education is better. And then once it's going to be as abundant as you're going to refer to it, it's just going to be part of our day-to-day. By the way, I should say, AI has been around us for a very long time, and we are using it even if we don't realize that we use it. Whenever we buy on Amazon, we get recommendations that are based on AI. Whenever we talk to Siri, we use full-blown AI algorithms.
Yeah,
So
Gmail, it already has it, like all this stuff. Yeah, it's already there.
you can't escape it. As long as you're part of civilization and as long as you're part of technology, AI is just going to be more and more around us. We do have to be aware. We do have to exert consideration, common sense, and regulation, just to make sure that the technology is being used in the best way possible. Because there are always people who are trying to make, the technology serve their own agenda, and that agenda might be bad sometimes, in all honesty.
Yeah. I want to switch gears for a little bit and just talk about something at the end of this conversation, if you don't mind. And again, I was listening to somebody talk about something this morning, and they were talking about the Lincoln assassination. And there's this famous quote, I can't remember it exactly, and it goes something like, except for the thing that happened up in the thing, like, how was the play, Mrs. Lincoln? And I kind of feel like that, I kind of feel like that's what it's like to be an Israeli entrepreneur, particularly today. But today really, in my mind, is no different than it's been for the last like 75 years. And I'm curious, like, if it builds a certain kind of resilient person who is like fundamentally better at building things from scratch and able to put up with like all the adversity that goes with building. I was talking to a buddy of mine this morning who's my business partner. We signed a deal today and it was like literally touch and go. And I don't share this a lot, but we signed a deal today and boy, it was really cool. And we weren't 100% sure what was going to happen. And if it did happen, it's amazing. And if it didn't happen, we were just going to have to regroup and figure out like, are we okay? Right? But that I feel like is the day-to-day life outside of building a startup of an Israeli entrepreneur. And I'm wondering if you just feel free commenting on that a little bit so people can get a better sense of what it's like day to day, not from a political perspective per se, but just from a personal perspective, if that's okay.
Yeah, sure. I would say it's obviously I'm not happy that this is a topic. I wish we were all.
I wish it wasn't a topic either, but it is, right?
It is. It is. You can't escape it, especially not nowadays. Yeah, I mean, look, operating as an Israeli from Israel has its challenges and advantages. I can talk about the part of the advantages first, because I do think that when we as Israelis have to face with the stress that we are facing as citizens, right? You are surrounded by people that explicitly state that they want you dead. That's the situation. I think for most people out there in North America, South America, Asia, Europe, it's not something they can even imagine, right? That everyone around you explicitly state that they want you dead. I think that forges you in many ways. It makes you very resilient. It makes you understand that nothing can be taken for granted, that you have to succeed because it's only up to you, right? You can't relax. You can't be laid back. You can't be calm. You can't be resting, basically. We don't let ourselves take the foot off the gas pedal, if that makes sense. So that's one thing. Whenever there's a big challenge at work, it also helps you keep things in perspective. We live, again, as an Israeli, I'm sure our listeners are aware, it's a tough time for us here. There are threats, real threats that happen all the time. Work is important, extremely important. We give our day-to-day to work, but we know what's really important. And as long as we are, touch wood, healthy and together, we also, it's a very grounding, right? It makes things, it puts things into perspective. Last but not least, one big other advantage that I can share as an Israeli entrepreneur is that it takes the role of leading a company and building a great company and contributing to the Israeli economy. It takes it to one additional extra level of almost a patriotical level. I want to help the country, not only quote unquote my company and our employees. I wanna be successful for the country's sake, for the state's sake as well. But there are also challenges. It's obviously very hard. It's hard operationally because it's very hard to operate when there's a war going on, as you can imagine. And it's also hard to, keep your focus on what counts from a business perspective when there are so many distractions, unfortunately, going around. But as I always say, we are tough, we are strong, we are just, and we have to prevail. We will prevail. And that is encouraging for myself, for the team here who has been amazing, and for all my colleagues and peers that are running amazing companies out of the Israeli ecosystem.
Okay, I went in on that. That's really, really powerful. Dr. Zohar Bronfman, a co-founder and CEO at Beacon AI. That was amazing. And again, thank you so much for sharing at the end. I think it's really important for people to understand and to humanize these things so they get a real sense of what's happening. Thank you again so much for your time.
Thank you, Michael.